And one of the other things that some people do, and it's not considered a wholesale, is they'll actually take title to it and put it back on the market the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole idea of the wholesaler is that the wholesaler, they're considered a contract vendee. They never actually take title to the property.
Mm-hmm.
They literally will, flip it at the table.
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes, and that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else. With your hosts, Dustin Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grenzig. With me, as always, Dustin Cohen. How you doing?
We're good. We have a long day of podcast today.
Yes,
but it's been fun. When we actually had a cancellation earlier, I actually ran ahead of the office. I was like, "Yeah, I get to eat lunch and breathe." Because it's been I did an event Wednesday night virtual. I did an event last night virtually, and I had 4 podcasts lined up for today. So I was like, luckily we're really busy at the office. So, I have all this free time.
Yeah. Luckily we got tons of deals in the pipeline.
Exactly. Right? No, it's been fun. We're hanging in there. We're doing what we can, trying to bring some value to all of our listeners. And I think we have a really good guest.
Yep, absolutely. Before we let him introduce himself, very quickly, guys, John and I and our guest will be speaking at a 100% free event on real estate investing. It's called the Long Island Real Estate Revolution. Originally, it was going to be 100% of proceeds going to LLS, Leukemia Lymphoma Society. It was going to be in person, but we had to change, obviously, because of what's going on. So it's now going to be 100% virtual. It's going to be 100% free. That's on April 19th. If you watch and if you like everything you see, all we ask is that you do donate to a great cause. If you want to go check it out and learn more about it, it's going to be all day, April 19th. You can go to lirealestaterevolution.com. And with that being said, our guest today is Dustin Cohen. He is a real estate attorney, or I don't even know if that's the only type of lawyer work you do, but we'll find out. You can probably do a better job than I can. So Dustin, with that being said, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys. As you said, my name is Dustin Cohen. I'm a residential, mainly real estate attorney. I do a lot of transactional work. My office is located in Westbury on Old Country Road. I represent a variety of different people and entities, from your first-time home buyers to, I represent a tremendous amount of investors, anyone from fix and flip to fix and hold. I have several clients who just do wholesaling. So, my practice kind of runs the gamut, from your first-time home buyer to guys that are doing this for a living. And it's been a good time up until a couple of weeks ago, obviously, and then everything kind of came to a halt, and now we all find ourselves sitting at home trying to keep the deals that we have alive.
Yes.
And also trying to source new business, and there's been a little bit. I've gotten, I want to say 5 deals this week that went into contract. Obviously the caveat is that hopefully the buyers are able to maintain their jobs so they can maintain their financing. That's the big thing that we're seeing right now.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I'm hoping that once this thing ends, that everything rebounds relatively quickly. Your guess is as good as mine.
Awesome. So I think that's great. And I think, we wanted to have you on because we want to get the opinions and insights into, tons of different aspects of the business. And I think, one of the components of being an investor is putting together your team, and who's part of your team, is attorneys, accountants, all sorts of other stuff, managers, lenders, et cetera. So happy to have you on to talk a little bit about that, especially in the residential space, because it's not something we always talk about, being multifamily guys ourselves. So can you just give us a breakdown of who your clients are, what they look to do, if you have any sort of specialties or anything like that, just to give people, again, a little bit more context of where you're coming from?
Sure. So mainly, my investor clients, again, I have clients that do a variety of different things. The majority of them are flippers. I have a couple of guys that buy and hold. either rehab and rent. I have some clients that literally just do wholesaling. They never actually want to take title to the property. A lot of people think that's one of the safest ways to get your feet wet in the investing world, because your exposure is relatively minimal,
Mm-hmm.
depending on what type of deal you can negotiate in the beginning. I tell a lot of people this, and again, I represent a lot of these people that do this stuff. So I've seen firsthand what works and what doesn't work. I'm by no means an expert, but I've seen a lot of different things happen. And I think if you talk to a lot of investors, they're going to tell you that you make your money when you purchase, not necessarily when you sell.
Mm-hmm.
Because particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, when flipping has become this really sexy thing and everyone watches these TV shows about how these guys buy a house on Monday and they spend $7 and sell it for $100,000 profit on Tuesday, that everyone thinks they can do it.
Yeah.
All right. I'm very, very involved in this scene. I'm not even comfortable, jumping in just yet.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that goes into it. And what I've seen happening a lot over the past year and a half is that a lot of my regular guys aren't able to get deals because you have people that are willing, newbies that are willing to spend so much over the going rate for that house and are underestimating their construction costs, underestimating their holding costs. And at the end of the day, these guys are getting hosed, so maybe they do 1 or 2 deals. But I think the inventory for a lot of the experienced guys that know what they're doing, it's been a little bit difficult.
No, I think that's really interesting. And it was a conversation very similar to us too, by the way. A lot of people entering our space of syndication that have, in our opinion, overpaid or grossly overpaid and severely under budgeted. And I think a lot of them are going to get found out during this period. For anybody listening, we are recording on April 10th. So keep that in mind for anything that changes from now until when this becomes live. I do think that is a parallel that we've seen for sure. Where the hell was I going with this? That date threw me off. I don't even remember.
April 10th.
No, I know. I guess, I don't know. John, save me here.
I was going to say.
This is the first time it's happened. So we're 45 episodes deep. I've never had this blunder. So
that's fine.
I'm so honored it could happen with me.
Yeah, it'll hit me. Take over.
No, I was going to say, Dustin, I think what was an interesting you said, because you're on the legal side. So my dad's an attorney, and he's bailed me out of some fun situations. I can say that some very fun situations. And our attorney now that handles our stuff is we have a really good relationship with him. And I vetted him. When I first started getting into this business, I felt that I had a silver bullet in my hole. Like if anyone was trying to take advantage of me, my dad was not only looking from the attorney standpoint, but he also was looking from the I'm his son.
Mm-hmm.
But I think something you said, which, resonates well with a lot of our listeners, is that, you're very experienced on the transactional side, and you can see, what's going on, what can go wrong, what can go right. And you said, even yourself, you're not, you don't even know if you're there yet to get involved. Is there something that, is that just from the standpoint of, what can go wrong, or is it just a totally different thing behind, maybe not getting involved or wanting to get involved, or seeing a guy buying something and selling it for, a $50,000 profit in 3 days and saying, wow, I wish I could do that. Because our attorney said the same thing. He said, I really want to invest with you guys at some point, just not right now. So it's always interesting to see the attorney's point of view on that.
I think obviously I've seen more than most just because, I'm involved on the ground level. Listen, I'm not trying to make it sound like everything is terrible. A lot of my clients have made this a very lucrative business and they're making a lot of money doing it. But at the same time, there's so many aspects to it that I personally don't know. And that, that everyone's going to hear at the event on the 19th, construction costs. I know just by speaking to a lot of my clients that over the past year, the cost of materials has increased substantially. I was talking to one of my clients a month ago and he said, lumber went up, 15%. And when you're doing 20 or 30 or 40 houses a year, that really hits your bottom line. I'm not familiar with a lot of those pieces, like I know the legal side, front to back, and I can make sure obviously that part is taken care of, but there's lots of other pieces to the puzzle, particularly So now the situation that we find ourselves in right now is a perfect example. So if you have people, and I have several clients like this, clients that went into contract, let's say the end of February, or, March 1st or March 2nd, before we really had a grip on what was going on here. Okay. And, a lot of investors usually don't have what's called a mortgage contingency in their contract, which means the deal is not contingent on them obtaining financing. Most of these guys have 5, 10, 20 hard money lenders lined up in their back pocket, ready to fund their deals. And then as soon as all of this happened, most of these hard money lenders stopped lending. There are a couple out there right now that still are, but a lot of them, particularly the ones that use warehouse lines in order to fund loans, their lines are frozen, so they can't do anything. So I have clients that are in a situation now where they're in contract, okay? And assuming that title comes in clear, they have to close. And we can't do anything about it. If they don't have the cash and they can't, borrow from their friends and family to close on this deal, then they risk losing their down payment and losing the deal. Now, obviously that's subject to, the attorneys on the other side being decent people, considering the situation that we're in. But at the same time, they have to represent their client also. And if that means that they need to keep the down payment because my buyer defaulted because he couldn't get financing, then so be it. That's probably what's going to happen. So there's so many pieces to the puzzle. There's so many potential pitfalls that you can't just jump in blindly. Like, you really need to, have an education, watch people do it. I know that a lot of people, and Chris, I listened to the podcast that you guys had done with Charles, and you had said that you kind of got your feet wet by passively investing. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really good way to kind of learn the ropes, have a little bit of skin in the game and be involved without potentially losing your shirt, and it's definitely a good way to get started.
Yeah. I mean, that conversation was always, hey, I can take 20 grand and throw it at a coach and hope they teach me what I need to know. Mm-hmm. Or I can throw it into a deal. Good shot, it makes money. Better shot that it makes money than not making money, depending mm-hmm. who you're with. Yeah. And you can probably learn a pretty similar amount to it on a deal you're invested in, you actually care about. So for us, it made a lot of sense. And we had gone the education course route and it didn't really pan out for a number of reasons. But it was that. I'm actually curious, as you were talking, with people being in contract on closings and this pandemic obviously being let's call it a once in a lifetime event or unforeseen event or whatever. If somebody were to lose deposit, a deal, money for something unforeseen, and like the other side is like super strict and like whatever, if they turned around and came back and like brought it to court and sued, in your opinion, I know you've no way of knowing, do you think there's any leniency that courts are going to give because of what's going on, despite how the contract is written? Or do you think most are going to be like, hey, the contract's the contract, you should have had something in there for this?
It's a good question, and I've been asked it probably 20 or 30 times mm-hmm. over the past couple of weeks. There are a lot of time provisions for acts of God. I don't know that this qualifies as an act of God. It's not a natural, depending on who you ask, I guess. I don't know that it's a natural disaster. I've had a lot of people that have asked me this thing, and there's also a provision called force majeure, which means it is what it is. Meaning, obviously, there was an outside circumstance that caused you not to be able to get financing or not to be able to close. Mm-hmm. So because of that, under the laws of equity, it's the right thing to do to give the down payment back. I would have to imagine, and again, of course, I don't know. I would have to imagine that a court would take that into consideration mm-hmm. when making a decision as to whether this buyer loses their down payment. It wasn't, it's going to be fact specific. It wasn't necessarily that buyer's fault. But, at the same time, these things happen on a somewhat regular basis anyway, without this natural disaster. So it's always, if you get typically it's not contingent on financing. and you wind up not closing, either by the closing date in the contract or, if the seller needs an extension, whatever the ultimate closing date is, typically the seller is allowed to keep the down payment as what's called liquidated damages, which means this is the money that they get for their time that was wasted because they had their property off of the market and you wound up not closing. So it's going to be interesting to see. I know that it's actually interesting. Probably 2 weeks ago, New York State Association of Realtors, NYSAR, they actually came out with something called a Corona Addendum that I've seen come through on a couple of contracts, and I paraphrased it and I took some pieces out of it. But basically what it says is that if a buyer is unable to close because of something related to the coronavirus, or if there are unforeseen delays, it kind of is what it is and you have to let it go. And if they're not able to get their financing, they have their financing and they lose it, then you need to let them out of the deal.
It's crazy because I was talking to a buddy of mine yesterday, and literally for the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it's just been it's call after call with everybody
Yeah.
And Chris, even on, we have a deal we're selling, and the buyers, they can't close, and they were supposed to close in March before this really happened. They took an extension into April, and then yesterday they need an extension to May. They've just been a miserable group to work with, and we're not going to give them their deposit back. But then you hear something like that, and I was talking to my buddy yesterday, and he used the exact same thing. He said, "Listen, is it going to qualify or not?" He said, "It's really in the hands of the guy behind the judge that looks at the case. If he's having a good day, bad day, he's going to make a decision. So your contract could be rock solid, but this is such a, it's not an act of God. I don't think it would qualify for under that."
I don't
that whole force majeure thing is something that is going to be the defense of, so it's like the flavor of the week. But, we also know that they can't close, forget a Corona. They don't have the money for it. But they're going to spin it in another way. But it's just interesting when, from the legal standpoint, we sit here and we're like, we got a rock solid case. And what do I always say, even, you get into things and just get into arguments. We always ask our attorneys, what do you think in your way? He's like, listen, if I was on the buy side, I definitely would, I would be blaming it on something. If I'm on the sell side, I'd be trying to keep the money. So it's, you could easily, if you have a client buying, you're going to take his side. If you have a client selling, you're going to take his side.
That's, that's the attorney's job. I mean, at the end of the day, and I tell clients this all the time, because everyone, whenever they hear, if they don't close, I can keep their down payment. Maybe, but the contract is only as strong as the person that's willing to enforce it. So if you keep someone's down payment, okay, and at the end of the day, that buyer sues you, okay, and depending on what the contract says or depending on what the judge decides, you may then be responsible for that buyer's legal fees if you didn't act in good faith. There's lots of different pieces to the puzzle. It's not usually as perfect as, he defaulted. Buyers don't usually walk away from their deposits without fighting, unless we're talking about a minimal amount of money and they just write it off as a cost of doing business and go on to the next. And that's what a lot of investors do. A lot of investors, they put down as little as possible, and as a buyer's attorney, I always want to put down as little as possible because that's, the least exposure you can have. And so sometimes I had one last week where my client was assigning and her end buyer wound up losing his financing. His deal wasn't contingent. His down payment was, I think, $3,000. So, he wrote it off. It's cost of doing business, and he's going to go on to the next. My client will, keep that, and she's going to lose a piece of her down payment because she didn't close either. So, it's the way it goes a lot of times, depending on how much money you have down.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think we see that a lot when you get up more into the institutional space. The deposits get significantly bigger. There's one specific deal we looked at. It was like a 20-something million dollar deal, and they wanted close to $1 million in deposit money down, just because it was, they wanted someone with discretionary capital. They didn't want to mess around. Pricing was important because it was just the submarket, but they were like, anybody too small, just don't even bother. We don't want to take the chance. So, it's, everybody wants to talk about price. There's a lot more to offers than I think just pricing, which
Of course.
a lot of people don't realize going into it. Just quickly, I know we've been touching on a little bit, but what have you been seeing as we go through this stuff, locally in New York with, your clients in real estate, and how are people thinking, and, what's been happening with the real estate market and stuff?
Well, what I'm seeing a lot of, and I'm sure this is at least statewide, is that for deals that were in contract, what I'm seeing is that a lot of buyers that have either, been laid off or lost their jobs, they had a mortgage commitment and now they're losing it because they lost their job.
Mm-hmm.
Most residential lenders do a verification of employment right before the closing. So, obviously we're not going to get to that point unless the borrower lies and says, yeah, I'm still working, but they usually require pay stubs and stuff also. So, I've had a bunch of deals that, that I'm trying to save, either getting alternative financing or, restructuring the deal. Some conventional borrowers that are now going to go FHA, there's lots of different things that these loan officers are having to get very creative now.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other things is that we're not able to get title right now. At least it's extremely slow. So the majority, I know Nassau and Suffolk clerk's offices, they're apparently open. They're operating on with a skeleton staff. So things that used to take, for a regular title search, I usually could get them, 7 to 10 days. And now I have a lot that, are way 2, 3, 4 weeks that I can't get.
Mm-hmm.
And also, with that, part of your title searches, I'm sure you guys know, your municipal searches. So certificates of occupancy, housing and building violations, street report, all that type of stuff. The building departments aren't really doing anything right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, on a lot of deals, most regular deals and even investor deals, because, a big piece and one of the pitfalls of investing, you need to see what COs are on that house that you're buying. Because if, the house has been dormered 6 times and it's extended in the back and they have a CO for, a 1-family house, then that you're going to have a lot of work to do to bring that house to code.
Yeah.
So we can't get that stuff right now. Like, I got a title search, an hour and a half ago, and it was 15 pages long because none of the municipals were there because they can't get them.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think things are moving. They're just moving significantly slower than usual.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, sellers are a little bit desperate right now because obviously they're having difficulty getting realtors to do these, virtual showings and stuff like that. I think that, their ability to sell is compromised also. So, to the extent buyers can get financing, it might be a buyer's market for a little while.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely see that shift for the next few months, if not even longer. So that's great. That's insightful. I actually I had a question too when you were talking earlier that I think you'd be good to ask. There's always this back and forth a little bit that I've seen on, different websites or in podcasts of like, is wholesaling legal? And I'm curious if you can touch on that a little bit, because I've seen people say yes, and then other people answering like, well, technically no, but technically yes. And I've never actually asked someone, because I've never done wholesaling. I've never tried, but I think, a lot of people, like you said, do look to do it first. And I think there's probably at least one person listening that has thought about it and, has probably run into the same thing.
I mean, my perspective on it is the contract needs to be specific as to what you can do and what you can't do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A typical residential contract is not assignable.
Okay.
Like every attorney in New York, or at least, Long Island, the boroughs for the most part, uses the same form contract. Okay. And then the attorneys either modify it by, adding a rider or by marking up the form contract. Form contract says that contracts are not assignable. To the extent that what your deal is going to be, you make it assignable. So, my feeling is it's a negotiated term. If the seller is aware as to what's going on and they have an assignable contract in there, then you should be able to do it. Now, you're going to get a lot of people that are going to say, well, it's not above board. The seller thinks that they're selling it to a particular person, and it turns out they're selling it to somebody else. And, at the end of the day, we know what the wholesale bid is. They're just, they're putting a piece on top. They're putting their vig on top, whatever it is, and they're selling it to a third party. They're taking their piece of the closing. The seller gets the money that's on the, the amount that's on the initial contract.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone walks away, and I'm not sure that it's been tested. I have to imagine it probably has, but I'd have to do a little research before I could give you a straight, 100% yes or no. But it's a pretty popular practice, particularly on Long Island, because, like I said before, you make money when you buy. And, there are a lot of people that either, a lot of estates, people that have passed on and, and the family needs to fire sale the house because they don't want to be bothered with it. And you have, there's opportunity, and a lot of these opportunists are wholesalers that'll get that deal under contract and then pass it off to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So what I know, and I know some states are significantly more harsh and more aggressive on don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
The way I always looked at it, because you're 100% right, is I always felt if the seller knew what he was doing and it was in the contract that was assignable, you were less wrong than if you tried to pull one over his eyes, because then you're almost acting as an agent and not representing his best interest. So I always assume, say, hey, listen, you go into this right away saying, I'm an investor, I'm going to flip the contract, I have a list of buyers. If he says okay to that, I think now I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a really good arguer. I think that person has a lot less of a battle than, going in there saying, I'll give you $100,000 when it's worth $5, right? Mm-hmm. That's just egregiously robbing someone, which is fine. And if the guy's willing to sell it for that and it's a fire sale situation, that's, buyer beware or seller beware. But, I don't think, the tough part in Long Island is that the opportunistic people, they get that because that's what they do. They're in that business. Mm-hmm. But when you try and set out to wholesale in Long Island, the struggle that some run into, in my opinion, is that you go in there and you're trying to offer people $200,000 and the house is worth $400 on the market. It doesn't take, they're not very easily that, they can say, well, I'm going to give it to you for $2 if I could sell it for $4 tomorrow. So it's like, that was always the struggle for me, and I wholesaled a couple houses on Long Island early on, like 2012, 2013. And that's where I was running into problems. Like I was offering people money and they're like, my neighbor's house just sold for $600. You wanted to give me $320. And I'm like, yeah, but that's because your house isn't worth $600. But no, I agree with, how you said it, as long as it's in the contract and it's understandable, I think there's less argument, but that's from my standpoint.
Yeah. And one of the other things that some people do, and it's not considered a wholesale, is they'll actually take title to it and put it back on the market the next day. Mm-hmm. So the whole idea of the wholesaler is that the wholesaler, they're considered a contract vendee. They never actually take title to the property. Mm-hmm. They literally will, flip it at the table. But you can also have a client that'll just buy it, take title to it, okay, and either they have a buyer lined up, or they could hypothetically put it on the market the next day. Obviously it'll cost them a little more money because, they paid to record a deed and, maybe they have to pay a realtor or whatever it is. So it might cost them a couple more bucks, but, that's another way that some people go about doing it.
Yeah. That's a clear cut way that, if you want to avoid any headaches.
That's arguably that's the cleaner way to do it for sure.
No.
I have another question. I heard, and I don't know if this is true, that when you go into a contract and you're going to wholesale, you technically have to go into contract with the intention to buy, and you should be able to have the ability to close on that property. So if you're trying to wholesale a $500,000 house and you need, call it $15,000 to $20,000 if you were getting an FHA, and you don't have that technically you would be in breach or whatever. Is that correct?
I mean, not necessarily, because the contract says, it depends on, obviously every contract is going to,
of course,
read differently. If, I'm trying to think of any that I've done recently. I have one under contract right now, and it's a non-contingent deal,
Mhm.
right? So this particular client, he has the means to buy it if he needs to. Okay, he could pay cash for it if he needs to. He doesn't want to. Like I always tell people, like what you just said, not necessarily that it's not enforceable, but I always tell clients, if you're going to wholesale, you should go into with the understanding that you're either going to lose your down payment or you should be able to close and purchase a property and do whatever you're going to do with it. But I don't think there's anything particularly in the language. I mean, you could argue that it's bad faith if you go into it never having the intention of purchasing,
Yeah.
and instead just trying to flip it. You could make the argument you were never going to buy this house in the first place. But in that case, if that wholesaler doesn't wind up closing, then he or she's going to forfeit their down payment anyway. And that, arguably, whether or not it's true, that's going to make the seller whole. Seller gets some money for his time and then moves on to the next.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Can you touch on, because I think this will be interesting too, any whether it's somebody new or like with a little bit less experience, like typical things that people need to look out for, or like mistakes that you see, or like pitfalls or things that people should be cognizant of as they get into some of this stuff?
Yes. The first thing, we touched on it a little bit before. One of the ways that you can get completely burned on a deal, particularly on Long Island, and Long Island is my main focus. I do a decent amount in the city, but Nassau and Suffolk are my bread and butter. And out here, the building departments are just all over people that are renovating. Okay, they have guys, building inspectors, that are just driving around looking to see if people are renovating houses and didn't pull permits. And one of the most common misunderstandings is that if you are just renovating the existing structure, that you don't need a permit, and that is not the case at all. Okay, if you are taking the kitchen and putting in a new stove and sheetrock and flooring and cabinets, you need to pull a permit. Okay, and a lot of people don't, and you can really get held up. And you can speak to any investor, and I guarantee you that at least half of them have had this happen, where they get caught not doing work without a permit, and then they get that nice big stop work order that gets put on the front door. And those things can hold you up for a really long time. Okay, the one that sticks out to me was, I had a client probably about a year and a half ago, was finishing the property. It was a property in Levittown. He just got renovated it, but he didn't change the footprint, he didn't extend it or do anything. Renovated it. He was literally pouring the asphalt to pave the driveway. He was done. And the building inspector drove by, looked it up, saw that he didn't have any permits, put that nice shiny thing on the door, and we couldn't close for over 2 months.
Wow.
And it was in contract. We were ready to go. The thing was done. So that cost him 2 months of hard money interest, taxes, insurance. So right there, that might have, estimating probably 10, 12, 15 grand that cost him right off the bat. So that's a really big thing. You can go down to the building department and see what's on file. One of the other things, particularly when you have clients that are buying, and a lot of investors, they're buying distressed properties. They're buying short sales, or they're buying estate sales. To the extent that you can underwrite your file a little bit before you go into contract, will give you a better chance of actually converting it. And what I mean by that is, a lot of distressed properties, in addition to the fact that the house might be underwater, that seller might have other issues. There might be judgments against him, liens, and other things like that. So a lot of times you'll go into contract, and it turns out when we get the title report, which is a month later after we've signed contracts, ordered title, and done all of that, that you find out that this seller has he has a judgment because his car got repossessed for 20 grand. He hasn't paid New York State income taxes for 10 years, so he's got 50 grand against him there. And it turns out that this deal doesn't make sense anymore, because in order for my buyer to get good title, all of those judgments have to be paid off in addition to the outstanding mortgage. So that house that he was getting for $250,000, now with all of these judgments on top, and you can always try and negotiate the judgments down, but now that house might be 275 or 300 and doesn't make sense anymore. You could have found that out if you run if you just run a lien search, even before you go into contract to see what's there. You can get a lien search, $200-$300. Find out what's there because it might not make sense.
Yeah.
Those are two big things.
No, I think it's important. I think obviously, like anything, even for us, your local area is going to change so much. Whether it's just, property taxes, permits, building codes, things like that. I mean, we had one example. We were buying a 60-unit property down in Jacksonville, Florida, and we thought we were going to be able to knock down and redevelop it potentially. We were buying it not because of that, but we thought that was an opportunity because there was literally a senior housing facility maybe not even half a mile up the road being built.
Okay.
And we knew how many units and what the acreage was and just rough math. And then, after a few weeks, maybe even a month worth of like talking to people, we hadn't gone under contract and we never ended up buying the deal, unfortunately. But found out that there was a city line where you crossed to go over, and the unit density was significantly higher over that line. So it was no longer we couldn't replicate what they were doing. So I mean, you're literally talking about a stone's throw away, and it's just night and day. It was like half of what you could build, and it just no longer made nearly any sense. And it was tight already. So I think it's so important for anybody listening to make sure you understand local code, ordinances, municipalities, permits, the whole nines before you do anything crazy.
Yeah, it's super important. A lot of times, particularly because on Long Island, the competition is so fierce that you have you have some guys that are doing volume that their margins are super tight. I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, I'm just taking this deal because I got to keep my crew busy, and if I make 15 or 20 grand on this house, I'll be ecstatic. That to me is, I mean, look, he's obviously got more overhead, but that to me is insane.
Yeah. Because
15 to 20 grand, you could get wiped out in a second. You can be behind the eight ball, that 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 easily. Easily. I mean, construction, half the time, and you go on Instagram and Facebook and watch any of these investors. Oh, I bought this house, and I didn't know that the foundation had a monstrous crack in it, or I didn't realize that this wood was completely rotten, and we have to redo this and redo that. Like, there's so many things that could really put a dent in it. You just got to be careful. You always have to have a contingency budget in there, because they're usually older houses that haven't been kept up, and things break and things go wrong. So you need to have a backup there. Yeah.
Is there any best practices you've seen from afar that you think some of your clients have done significantly better than others, or anything like that, whether it's contingencies, certain types of lending, certain types of systems? I don't know how much you get into it and stuff like that, but you obviously have good exposure to a number of different people. I'm not sure if anything's
I think that the guys that are doing a good job are the guys that deliver. I have a fair amount of investors that do a really good job, and what that means is that ultimately they wind up having a really good relationship with their lenders. Okay, which means a lot of hard money lenders, depending on how sophisticated they are, some will before they'll even consider giving you a loan, they're like a regular bank. They're going to do an appraisal. They're going to run your credit. They're going to, see, what your debt to income ratio is, what your resources are, all that type of stuff. And then once you get to a point, a lot of my clients at this point, they can pick up their phone and text their lender and say, I'm trying to close on this house in East Meadow tomorrow. This is the number. This is what I think I'm going to spend to renovate it. This is what I think it's going to sell for. Can you do it for me? And those types of relationships are tremendous, because a lot of times, particularly in the distressed market area, you'll have a house that you might get a call on Monday, and it's going to auction on Friday, or you have a short sale and an approval expires 2 days from now, and you might need to get your financing in order really quickly. This expands to everything. If you deliver, if you do a good job, I think that you're going to be successful. Going earlier to your point of having a team, you need to know who you're going to beforehand. A lot of people don't necessarily realize that getting financing, there's lots of lenders out there, particularly on Long Island, because it's such a popular thing. But it's not as simple as just calling them up, the first time that you meet them and saying, I need a loan. Can you do this for me? You need to establish a relationship. Obviously, need to have an attorney in your corner, that knows what he or she is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And the investment side of things is a lot different than, your first time home buyer side of things. There's a lot more pitfalls on the investor side. When you have your first time home buyer, they're buying a house, there's probably not judgments on title. Hopefully there's not violations. A lot of the things that come with buying distressed properties, at lower amounts, come with warts. So there's just a lot of things you got to look out for. I'm trying to think whatever, obviously the construction, as we said before, I think that as you get further into it, a lot of the guys that do this on a regular basis, they'll walk through a house in 10 minutes and they know,
Mm-hmm.
or they know, pretty closely what it's going to cost to renovate that house. They have, strategies in place, this is what we're going to do in this room. This is what we do in this room. And they just kind of have it down. That comes with time.
Yeah.
For
sure.
So there's a lot that goes into it for sure.
Yeah. Another question I thought of while you were talking, from our side, like the investor side, and I'm sure there's probably a long list of things that, drive you up the wall or make you crazy or things like that. Everyone's got them with any sort of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that us as investors either should understand about what it is that you do, or is there things that we can do differently or better, or, whatever, that not only would make your life easier, but also would just, improve the relationship between you and your clients?
That's a good question. I might have to think about that one for a minute. Obviously, for me, communication is super important. A lot of times everyone is so busy, they get caught up in their own stuff. And, I might find out about a deal and, get a contract in my email and PS, there's 50 other things that I need to know about. And I'll spend time negotiating terms when I was missing half of the information that I needed. Communication is huge, and it's, sometimes I'm just as bad as anybody else. I'm trying to think. Nothing honestly that comes off the top of my head. I just like to know what's going on, and sometimes I don't.
My buddy's an attorney. Same thing. He does a lot of short sale and foreclosure stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He says that, some of the people he works with, literally, they show up with oh, hey, you should have this signed already. And he's like, are you fucking kidding me, bro? You can't just bring it to my office and expect it to be done tomorrow. Just let me know beforehand so I can at least be prepared. It drives him crazy.
Yeah, it's everyone wants everything done yesterday. And I'm not one to talk to any of my clients or any of my friends for that matter. I take my time. I'm not the guy that's going to take a contract and blow through it in 5 minutes and tell you, come in, give me a check for $50,000 and let's get going. I don't do that. I never have. I'm not going to. I think that's where you start to make mistakes, or you might miss a really important provision on the last page of that paragraph, the last page of, of the contract that says, oh, it's not contingent on financing, or this, that, or the other thing, particularly with residential contracts. Again, the form contract is in the beginning, and then you have a rider. The rider terms are going to modify that form contract. You got to read everything, I have clients that tell me the day before how they're borrowing, how they're getting financing. I'm like, I need to know all this stuff. There's stuff that I have to do, whether, am I representing the lender? Do I need to draw up loan docs for closing tomorrow morning? I need to know the amount. I need to know the lender's name for the title insurance policy. Like there's lots of pieces that I have to do on my end, and that's my number one pet peeve. Give me notice. I know that things happen and things come up really quickly. Let me know when you can, so that, I'm not, running around like a lunatic at 8 o'clock in the morning for closing at 10 o'clock. And it happens. It happens all the time. It's just the nature of the business.
Especially in this space, like that investor world on Long Island, because the deal comes in and the guy's like, I got to sell it by 9:30.
Mm-hmm.
And, then someone's calling you 40 calls by 7:30 in the morning. I'm like, yeah, I can't. What do you want me to do here? Like,
all the time. I wake up in the morning half the time. If the text didn't wake me up, because I still haven't learned the lesson not to keep my phone on my dresser, 2 feet from my head. But there's so much competition here. You have guys that are buying the auction list. They know, a lot of times we'll be at a closing and the seller, for a short sale will say, you're the 50th person that called me to buy this house. Like the competition is crazy here. It really is. Like, particularly in the last, 3 or 4 years ago, it was really nuts. I think it slowed down a little bit. I think that the short sale banks, started smarting up a little bit and started, requiring higher purchase prices. But there's a ton of inventory on Long Island. We're still seeing houses, that were purchased in 07, 08, when you could basically walk into a bank and tell them you made $500,000 and they give you a mortgage the next day. And we're still seeing, a lot of short sales, a lot of REOs from that period. And, I keep thinking it's going to slow down, and it really hasn't. I don't know if this current pandemic that we're involved in right now is going to, have a long-term effect. I think that remains to be seen, but it's definitely a real competitive market here for sure.
Yeah. I know when we were because we started out trying to flip homes, and that was the education course I alluded to. We didn't even scratch the surface, and we pretty quickly realized, like, hey, everything you've said, margins are so thin, competition's so fierce. We're like, how are we even supposed to compete in this space? I think, if we'd stuck it out longer, we probably would have carved a niche for ourselves. Like anything, you stick it long enough, eventually you break a little way through into it. But yeah, it's just, crazy the amount of money that people want to deploy here, how little people are willing to make on stuff in this area, returns on what you're looking for. We just didn't see it. And also too, how many people are willing to cut corners to make deals work? Because there's a lot. Like I looked at one time, I went to Hofstra for college. I thought about buying a house there, and I was going to buy a Cape. And I was just going to turn the basement into 3 bedrooms, like everybody does there.
Like everybody over there.
Everybody does there. Mm-hmm. But then started calling around. I found it was completely illegal. I was like, well, that's bad. Like, even if you put like, what is it? Like what's the term where it's like
egress you have windows?
Yeah. If you do egress windows, you couldn't do it. I asked about putting a separate staircase out the back. Mm-hmm. They just said no. Like, unless your basement is, I think it was mid-grade, you can't have any living space down there. And I was like, well, that sucks, because there's 40 or 50 other people that don't care and are willing to do it.
Uh-huh.
If I'm going to compete on 4 bedrooms versus 7 bedrooms, I'm going to lose every single time. It doesn't even make sense. And then I started thinking, like, well, what if I, knocked off the second store, and built and made like 5, and I was like, where the hell am I going to come up with this money? What am I doing? So, I think there's so many people willing to do those things and cut corners because they'll risk not getting caught, or, they'll make their money until they get caught and then, pivot. And I was just like, that's not what I'm looking to do. So
to go to all your friends or your old friends and tell them that they could stop paying rent.
Yeah.
And then, then buy the houses from the landlords for penny on the dollar.
I don't have those friends in college anymore. I should have done it.
Something that we were talking about before, and it just came to my mind in terms of, things that investors should be doing. Having relationships with realtors and people that are bringing you deals is hypothetically what the most important piece, because that's where you're going to make your money. So you have to have a huge network of people that, because most of the houses that these guys are buying are not on the MLS. They never even hit the MLS.
Mm-hmm.
It's a realtor got a deal, it's an estate sale, or they have a short sale, and they call, investor A or investor B right off the bat before it even goes to market. If it goes to market, the prices are going to wind up being too much anyway, because you're going to have everybody bidding on it. So your network around here is, anywhere else is huge, is absolutely huge. You need to, have a wide variety of people, particularly, like if you're going to, zone in on a particular area, if you like Capes in Uniondale, or, you want to be, on the South Shore in Suffolk County or something like that, ingratiate yourselves with the realtors there, the people that are there every day that have storefronts on Main Street that people are coming into. Those are the people that are going to feed you your deals, for sure.
No, absolutely. Last question, because I think it'll give some people a lot of good information. In your opinion, what are some things people should be asking when they're vetting an attorney? Like, what are some important things to look for?
Well, it depends on what you're doing. Obviously,
Sure.
I preach this all the time, and, don't hire your divorce attorney, your mother's divorce attorney, or your cousin that does corporate law to do your real estate closing. I don't do matrimonials, I don't do corporate work. Like, it's not, and everyone thinks, oh, a lawyer knows how to do everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. My dad's a personal injury attorney. If I get somebody that calls me and says I was in a car accident, I tell them, I don't know anything more than you do, call him. It's really, you can't be good. You might be able to be okay at everything. You can't be good at everything.
Right.
You can't. There's just too much. It's like if you guys were trying to, do your multifamily stuff and also, flip houses in Nassau County, and, it just doesn't work. If you become overextended, you can't really do a good job at everything. Particularly in the investor space, like when I started doing a lot of investment deals, like anybody else, it was new to me. I'd had a lot of experience, just doing residential standard transactions, purchases and sales and stuff like that. But if you're going, particularly if you're a new investor and you're looking to get into the space, I would really recommend, asking questions. How many investors do you represent? How many, investment transactions have you done? Do you have experience, with clients in these particular areas, particularly in villages? Villages are a little bit different in terms of, they have their own building departments, typically their own police force. So, they do things a little bit differently. A lot of my clients, particularly ones that are just getting into the game, ask me, do I have relationships with lenders
Mm-hmm.
that I could put them in touch with? Because, the idea is, to the extent I want to be a center of influence for my clients. So if they need somebody, if they need an accountant, if they need a realtor, I want them to call me, and I can put them in touch with people that I know and that I've worked with in the past and that I trust. So, that's super important. Trying to think what else. That's really all that comes to off the top of my mind. I'm sure I'll come up with a billion things after we go online. But
goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all good. Cool. I think that's a really great place to wrap it up. Dustin, thanks so much for coming on, sharing your knowledge, expertise, experience. I'm really looking forward to hearing more during the event and hear what you have to share with people. Again, guys, if you want to go check it out, the event is lirealestaterevolution.com. It's going to be April 19th, all day Sunday. I know you got nothing to do, so make sure you go check it out. Dustin, if people want to learn more about you, if they want to get in touch with you, talk to you, where's the best way to do that?
Sure. Best way to get in touch with me is email. My email is dustin@dustincohenlaw.com. You can always call me in my office. My office number is 516-488-7000.
Awesome. We will drop that in the comments below. Guys, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast already, it would mean the world to us if you would do that. And if you are subscribed, please share it with a friend, a family, an acquaintance who you think would get a ton of value out of it. Dustin, once again, thank you so much. This was tremendous. Can't thank you enough.
Thank you guys.